While Democrats celebrated their wins on Tuesday, the exit polls told a different story. White voters are still choosing Republicans who harm them, proving once again that maintaining racial hierarchy matters more than their own survival. Tuesday, November 4th, 2025 was supposed to be a referendum on Republican governance. Democrats swept major races across the country. They won New York City, Virginia, New Jersey. California voters approved Proposition 50. Republicans lost badly. The government shutdown was day 35 and causing massive pain. SNAP benefits were delayed. Section 8 payments weren't going out. Federal workers hadn't been paid in over a month. The economy was struggling. And yet, when you look at the exit polls, when you dig into who actually voted for whom, you see something that Black Americans have known for generations. A significant portion of white voters are perfectly fine with the pain Republicans are causing as long as they believe that pain is being distributed in ways that maintain racial hierarchy. Let me break down what the exit polls actually showed, because this is important. In Virginia, Democrats won. Abigail Spanberger became the state's first female governor. But here's what the data shows about white voters. In 2021, when Republican Glenn Youngkin won the governorship, white voters without college degrees broke for him by a massive 52-point margin, 76% to 24%. That's more than double the margin by which Trump won those same voters in 2020. White non-college women backed Youngkin by 50 points. These voters made up 36% of the Virginia electorate. Now, in 2025, Democrats won Virginia, but that doesn't mean white voters suddenly abandoned Republicans. What happened is that other constituencies, particularly young voters, voters of color, and suburban educated voters, turned out in large enough numbers to overcome the white voters who continued supporting Republicans despite the government shutdown, despite the economic pain, despite everything. In New Jersey, the pattern is similar. Democrat Mickey Sherrill won, but exit polls showed that voters concerned about property taxes, which 70% of New Jersey voters identified as a major problem, actually favored the Republican candidate Jack Ciattarelli. White working-class voters in South Jersey continued to support Republicans even as Republican policies were actively harming their economic interests. The pattern holds in New York City, too. While Zohran Mamdani won decisively, Republican Curtis Sliwa still received votes from white New Yorkers despite offering no real solutions to the affordability crisis that's crushing all New Yorkers. And when Trump endorsed Andrew Cuomo at the last minute, 70% of Republicans voted for Cuomo over their own party's nominee, showing that they'll follow Trump's lead even when it means abandoning their own candidate. California is the exception, and it's instructive. In California, white voters supported Democrats more consistently, and Democrats passed Proposition 50. But California has a very different demographic makeup and political culture than the rest of the country. It's the exception that proves the rule. When white voters are in an environment where supporting Republicans means being in the clear minority and where Democratic governance has produced relative prosperity, they'll vote blue. But in most of America, that's not the case. So what does this tell us? It tells us that white voters, particularly white working-class voters, are willing to endure significant economic pain as long as they believe the social order that places them above Black and brown people remains intact. They'll vote for Republicans who cut the programs they depend on. They'll vote for Republicans who create government shutdowns that stop their paychecks. They'll vote for Republicans whose policies harm their communities. Because for many white voters, maintaining white supremacy is more important than their own material well-being. This is not new information for Black Americans. We've been watching this pattern for centuries. We watched poor white voters support slavery even though slavery depressed wages for all workers. We watched white workers oppose unions that included Black members even though integrated unions would have been more powerful. We watched white families support cutting social programs they themselves used because they believed Black families were benefiting too much. We watched white communities vote for politicians who promised to hurt those people even when those same politicians were implementing policies that devastated white communities too. The psychology is clear. For many white Americans, their position relative to Black Americans matters more than their absolute position in society. They would rather be poor in a system where Black people are poorer than be middle class in a system where Black people are equal. They would rather suffer under Republican policies that maintain racial hierarchy than thrive under Democratic policies that promote racial equality. This is why Black Americans can never be Republicans. Not truly, not in any way that serves our interests. The Republican Party has shown us, repeatedly and clearly, who they are and what they value. They embrace anti-black racism as a core strategy. They oppose equality as a fundamental principle. They fight against voting rights that would increase black political power. They attack any program or policy that would close racial gaps as woke. They call diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts discriminatory against white people. They defend Confederate monuments and oppose teaching accurate history about racism. They support police violence against black communities. They oppose reparations. They oppose affirmative action. They oppose anything that would genuinely address systemic racism. So how could black Americans possibly be part of a party whose entire motivation is against us? How could we support a party that views black progress as a threat? How could we align ourselves with a party that has made opposition to black advancement a central part of its political identity? The answer is we can't. Not if we're honest about our interests. Not if we're serious about black liberation and black prosperity. Not if we actually care about the well-being of black communities. And yet, there are black conservatives. There are black Republicans. There are black people who have aligned themselves with a party and a movement that is fundamentally opposed to black interests. And I need to talk about what's happening to them right now, because it's instructive. Black conservatives are getting the business from the extremists on the right. They're being marginalized. They're being dismissed. They're being treated as tokens who are no longer useful now that the mask has come off. Because here's the thing. Republicans needed black conservatives when they wanted to claim they weren't racist. They needed black faces to point to when people accused them of white supremacy. They needed black voices to repeat their talking points so they could say, "See, even black people agree with us." But now, in the age of MAGA, when Republicans are saying the quiet parts loud, when they're openly embracing white grievance politics, when they're no longer pretending to care about racial equality, they don't need black conservatives anymore. The useful idiots have become just idiots. The tokens have lost their value. And black conservatives are discovering what black Americans have been trying to tell them all along. You were never truly welcome in that party. You were used. And now that you're no longer useful, you're being discarded. We're seeing this play out in real time. Black Republicans who thought they had a seat at the table are discovering they were always meant to stand in the corner and smile. Black conservatives who thought their loyalty would be rewarded are learning that loyalty only flows one way. Black voices who amplified Republican talking points are finding that Republicans don't actually care about their perspectives or their communities. And at some point, these black conservatives are going to try to come back to the black community. They're going to realize they made a mistake. They're going to understand they bet on the wrong horse, and they're going to want to return home. This reminds me of the scene in the TV miniseries Queen by Alex Haley. For those who don't remember, Queen tells the story of a mixed-race woman navigating identity and belonging in America. There's a powerful scene in a church where Queen, after spending years trying to pass as white and distance herself from her black heritage, attempts to return to the black church and black community. And the community's response is complex. There's hurt, there's anger, there's a question of whether someone who denied their people can be welcomed back. That's where we are with black conservatives. Some of them spent years denying racism exists, years attacking black movements like Black Lives Matter, years defending police violence against black people, years opposing policies that would help black communities, years serving as shields for white supremacist politicians, years collecting checks for saying things that white conservatives wanted to hear from black mouths. And now that MAGA is collapsing, now that Republicans are showing their true colors even more explicitly, now that black conservatives are being cast aside, some of them are going to want to come home, and the black community is going to have to decide how to respond. My position is this. Black conservatives who want to return to the black community need to do more than just show up. They need to acknowledge the harm they caused. They need to explain why they made the choices they made. They need to demonstrate genuine understanding of how their rhetoric and their advocacy damaged black people and black progress. They need to show that they've learned and changed. And then maybe there can be a conversation about reintegration. But let me be clear. Black conservatives don't get to waltz back into black black spaces without accountability. They don't get to pretend their choices didn't matter. They don't get to act like they weren't complicit in advancing policies and rhetoric that harmed black communities. There needs to be a reckoning. There needs to be acknowledgement. There needs to be restitution. Because here's the reality. While black conservatives were caping for Republicans, black activists were fighting for voting rights. While black conservatives were defending police violence, black organizers were demanding accountability. While black conservatives were attacking woke policies, black communities were fighting for resources and recognition. While black conservatives were collecting checks from right-wing think tanks, black people were suffering under the policies those think tanks promoted. So no, black conservatives don't just get to come back without questions. They don't get automatic forgiveness. They need to earn their way back if we decide to let them back at all. Now back to white voters and Republicans, because this is the larger context that makes black conservatism so absurd. Republicans are actively harming America. The 35-day government shutdown proved that. The cuts to SNAP and Section 8 prove that. The refusal to address the cost of living crisis proved that. The embrace of chaos and dysfunction proved that. And yet, white voters continue supporting them in large numbers. This tells us something fundamental about American politics. For a significant portion of white Americans, hurting the right people matters more than helping everyone. They would rather burn the house down with everyone in it than see black people have an equal room. They would rather suffer themselves than see black people prosper. They would rather destroy functioning systems than accept racial equality within those systems. This is the party that black conservatives chose to align with. This is the movement they defended. These are the voters they claim to represent, and those voters never saw them as equals. Those voters saw them as useful. And now that they're not useful anymore, those voters are done with them. The exit polls from Tuesday show us once again that white voters will choose Republicans even when it hurts them, even when there's a government shutdown, even when their benefits are cut, even when their paychecks stop, even when the economy suffers. Because for many of them, maintaining their position above black people is worth any economic cost. Black Americans cannot be part of that party. We cannot align ourselves with that movement. We cannot support that political project because it is fundamentally opposed to our existence, our equality, our prosperity, our freedom. Black conservatives made a choice to ignore that reality. They made a choice to believe they could be exceptions. They made a choice to think their loyalty would be rewarded. And now they're learning what we tried to tell them. You can't make deals with people who view your very existence as a problem to be solved. So what happens now? Democrats won on Tuesday, but white voters proved they're still willing to support Republicans. The government shutdown will eventually end, but the underlying dynamics remain. MAGA is collapsing, but white grievance politics will find new forms. Black conservatives are being cast aside, but some will try to return. The question for Black America is, what do we do with all of this information? Do we continue trying to convince white voters to vote in their own interests? Do we continue participating in a Democratic Party that takes our votes for granted? Do we welcome back Black conservatives who abandoned us? Do we build our own independent political power? I'm advocating for the latter. I'm advocating for Black Americans to stop worrying about convincing white voters of anything. They've shown us who they are. They've proven they're fine with pain as long as it maintains hierarchy. We need to focus on building black political and economic power that doesn't depend on white voters making better choices. I'm advocating for Black Americans to demand tangibles from Democrats rather than just being reliable voters. We delivered Virginia, New Jersey, and New York for Democrats. What do we get in return? Specific policies with specific budgets that specifically benefit Black communities, or we start exploring other options. And I'm advocating for a very high bar for Black conservatives who want to return to Black spaces. Acknowledgement, accountability, restitution, and time. Not automatic forgiveness, not immediate acceptance. They need to earn their way back if we decide to let them back at all. White voters proved on Tuesday that they're fine with the pain Republicans cause. They've proven it throughout American history. They'll prove it again in the future. That's who they are. That's what we're dealing with. And Black Americans need to make decisions based on that reality, not based on hope that white voters will suddenly become different people. The exit polls told the truth. The question is whether we're ready to act on what that truth reveals.